This is Metabolic Mastery, a core medical technologies podcast dedicated to advancing knowledge and practice in metabolic testing. Welcome to Metabolic Mastery, brought to you by Core Medical Technologies. I'm Dr. Marc Humbert, and this is my co-host, Dr. Cameron Garber. And today we're going to be talking about exercise calories, how they're estimated. We get a lot of questions about how the core software estimates those, what it's looking at. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and then just exercise calories in general, some of the issues with overestimation in real life, right, during workouts and things like that. So we'll dive into all of that. But we first want to start out talking about why exercise calories are estimates in the first place.
Right. Well, and why it's, this is why we do the testing.
Mm-hmm.
So both the RMR and the VO2 testing, so that we can dial in people's calories so that they can be precise. So with the resting metabolic rate test, we can find out what's kind of that basement of how many calories can we eat down to without underfueling and causing problems by slowing our metabolism down and things like that. So kind of what's that resting metabolic rate number, so I know that. And then with the exercise testing, we can then dial in better how many calories am I burning at different intensity levels. What's the mixture of fats and carbs that I'm burning at those different intensity levels? So it really helps us to dial all of that in. And with our RMR test, it gives us some estimates of the daily energy expenditure as well as the exercise energy expenditure. And sometimes, like Marc was saying, we get some questions about those energy expenditure values and where they come from. And those are just estimates. We'll talk about how we can make them a little bit more precise and things. But those estimates, there are some inherent flaws, but they can still be useful. Hopefully we'll put them in the right context so that they can be more useful to you.
Yeah. Well, and I think the base thing to understand, and we've talked about this on other episodes, is how predictive equations work. And it's based on population data. And so it's really good at looking at things in populations, but there's a lot more variability person to person. And we see that when we look into the actual research articles. It'll show, their error bars, right? How much uncertainty is there in those measurements? And so when we apply this to the individual, there can actually be quite a bit of variability. And so this is why that testing can be nice. And when we're looking at, like, if we really wanted to see, like, how much is someone's total daily energy expenditure, and we wanted to be just as precisely accurate as possible, we would stick them in a metabolic chamber all day, and they would do all of their eating in there. They would do all of their exercising. They would do everything in there. And so that, what happens in metabolic chamber is it's measuring the heat that's given off. And then that lets us know how many calories are utilized throughout the day. But because those are prohibitively expensive, only used in research studies, and just not technically feasible.
Right. Well, even in research studies, it's so hard to find people who can just give up, that amount of time to be studied. So.
Yeah. And so what we're using the cardio coach for is it's that indirect calorimetry. And so because of that precise relationship between the oxygen utilized and the calories burned, we can use that to say, okay, this much oxygen is used during this time period, or at this metabolic rate, and so this is going to be what that resting metabolic rate is, right? This is how many calories someone's going to be using throughout the day, and so we can get a really good precise number for that when we directly measure that. Versus you look at even the RMR estimation equations, and the most accurate has a pretty small average prediction error. It's like plus or minus 16 calories, but the limits of agreement, how much that can vary, is like 700 calories, right?
Yeah, on average, they're like between 15, depending on the study, like 15 or 10% and 30% off.
Yeah.
And so depending on the population you're looking at, it can be as much as 30% off on average.
Yep.
That's a big variation.
Absolutely. And so with the RMR testing, if we're just doing the RMR testing alone, the reason that we have the estimate for energy expenditure and then also for the daily activity is because we're not running that on them throughout the entire day. And so we don't necessarily have a great idea of what they're going to do activity-wise outside of the test. That's why that the exercise test, right, when we're doing the VO2 testing, helps us to bring in those numbers. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's why if we're doing the RMR test alone, we're using those predictive equations.
Right. And then if you do the exercise test, we can help refine some of those numbers. Yeah. It's really helpful to be able to dial that in, but to have that base understanding of where this is coming from. And that, yeah, it's an extrapolation of, okay, if we have you sit there in a chair for 20 minutes and then extrapolate that over the day, that would be your resting metabolic rate. And you'll see a lot of other pieces of equipment that use BMR, so basal metabolic rate, which is, they're not actually able to measure basal metabolic rate. And that's a whole maybe conversation in and of itself. The fact that they call it that is a little frustrating to me always, because it's not good science. But they also use just predictive equations to get that number. So a lot of your equipment that will do body composition. So I get that question quite a bit of like, what about my, fill in the blank device that measures body composition, whether that's bioelectrical impedance or DEXA, it has a BMR number there. Is that close to what core gets? And not even close. They are using predictive equations. It's not really any more accurate even than just using the predictive equation without doing the scan. And so they're not very accurate. That's not being based on anything that they're measuring. It's just an equation.
Yeah.
And so
if that's all you have, it can be a helpful starting place. But
yeah,
where we can do this type of testing and find out, like, based on your data, what is this for your body, not relying on those predictive equations, that helps us dial in things a lot more simply.
Right, because it's basing it on your physiology.
Yep.
So somebody with the same muscle mass may have very different kind of mitochondrial density, mitochondrial efficiency. So their ability to process calories, they may have way more blood vessel endings into that muscle and things like that. So because somebody that two people that have the same muscle mass, but one is getting in shape and the other one is detuning their fitness, their metabolic kind of efficiency is going to be quite different.
Yeah.
And so that's something you have to take into account. And that's what, indirect calorimetry does, is we're actually measuring that versus an estimation.
Awesome. So what I want to do now is talk briefly about some of the estimation equations that are used.
Yeah.
And so in general, there are estimation equations that take into account your resting metabolic rate, and there's ones that don't. And so of the predictive equations, the one that take into account your actual resting metabolic rate is going to be a little bit more accurate. But again, what are they doing? So what Core uses is it's looking at your RMR, and then it's also looking at the MET equivalent of whatever activity, right? And so if it's light exercise, we look at that as 3 METs, moderate 6 METs, and hard or high intensity as 9 METs. And so it's taking that measured RMR, multiplying it by the METs, and then multiplying it by the duration of the workout, and then to get that calories per minute, it's just dividing by minutes in a day. And so that's what it's looking for. And then based on that's going to give you the readout for how many minutes you did, right? So we're looking at RMR times the MET equivalent times the minutes of exercise, and then we're just dividing by minutes in a day, and that gives us the estimated calorie expenditure of that workout. Other ones use just METs and weight and minutes, things like that. There's also specific equations for strength training. So there are RMR adjusted equations that take into account, again, RMR and body weight, and then unadjusted ones. One of the ones that I've seen used pretty frequently is it has a modifying factor, use your kilograms, and then number of hard sets that you did in exercise. So it makes it really simple. And that seems to be a pretty good equivalent. But why do I bring that up? It's because we questions, right? I bring that up because questions. So we've had some people reach out and say like, oh, okay, well, like I filled this in for cardio, what about strength training estimates?
Yeah.
And so that is something to consider, just because you're using some different pathways, some different energy pathways for aerobic exercise versus strength training exercise. Especially if we're doing, that low intensity, long duration aerobic exercise, we're mostly going to be using our aerobic system, and it's going to be steady and consistent. Versus strength training is we're going to be using more of those glycolytic pathways, right? The faster energy pathways during the actual lift. And then during recovery, we're kind of switching over to more of those aerobic systems. And so it's a mix of both, but that can somewhat change like how many calories are burned during that workout. That being said, it ends up being pretty similar. Strength training typically burns a few more calories just because of the higher intensity if we're comparing it directly to like low intensity aerobic activity. The thing to think about anyway here is like, where do exercises fall in terms of total daily energy expenditure? We'll talk a little bit more about this in a future episode. But when we're looking at our total daily energy expenditure, we've got our RMR, we've got exercise activity, we've got non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and then we've got the thermic effect of food. So how much does it cost to get the energy out of food? And so for RMR, that makes up like 60 to 70% of our metabolic rate. The thermic effect of food, 10 to 15%, total daily energy expenditure, 60 to 70% of our total daily energy expenditure. TEF, 10 to 15%. NEAT, big lever, up to 20%.
My favorite conversation.
Exercise, typically around 5%.
Yeah.
And so it is there, it's part of that, but it's not always as big of a lever as we think. So one more thing that I was going to say with that is when we're looking at calories burned during exercise, right? I do a workout, my watch says, and we'll talk about this too, my watch says I burned 300 calories. Part of that equation like is what you would have burned anyway if you hadn't have exercised, right? And so like, if I were just doing my daily activity, how many calories would I burn during that time? And so we technically want to subtract that from the calories burned during exercise. If we're saying like, how much above and beyond my resting metabolic rate is this burning?
Right.
And so that's something that we often don't account for. Some people will talk about, oh, well, what about like EPOC, right? That excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, right? The burn as I'm recovering from exercise. And that was kind of hyped, probably like 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, it was super big conversation, but
really when we look at the data, it's pretty small. So like really intense workouts, it amounts to like 50 to 100 calories of excess burn. And
when you compare just light aerobic activity, so zone 2 aerobic activity and a HIIT workout, you're like 75 more calories of recovery.
Something like that.
The epoch burned. So depending, there's a lot of factors that can go into that, obviously, but it's really not a ton, not a major mover. I mean, everything burned is good, but it's just not going to be like, oh, I'm still burning all these calories. So people will use that to justify eating more, or that one exercise is more effective than the other, and it's like not really, especially if one, you're training your body to burn fat, so it's more, adaptive and more metabolically flexible and things like that. And so, a lot of the epoch conversation is definitely overstated. So one of the things that I really like about this, what you were talking about with having these numbers, is that we can sit on the same side of the table with our patient instead of sitting across the table and being like, you're doing this wrong, or you're kind of blaming the patient. We can sit side by side with them and really use these numbers to help counsel them and be able to say, here's where we're at and here's where we're going. And so I just love that when we're talking about why we need these accurate numbers, is it allows us to be a lot more compassionate and blame the numbers when we're maybe not where we're wanting to be, instead of blaming the patient. I love that factor.
Oh, totally. I just saw this. Never look in Twitter or YouTube comments or anything. Never look at the comments. That's a caveat. But it was interesting. They were just talking about, someone had been through a fitness journey, and this person had commented something about that person being lazy. That drives me crazy, right?
Yeah.
Is like, you have no idea what that person looks like, right? You have no insight into their life, and to make this huge value judgment. And I think that when we don't have good data and perhaps understanding of how to communicate things to clients, we can do things like that, right? And put the blame all on the client. And so having those numbers really helps us to say like, yeah, here's the areas where there's some improvement needed. Here's the next steps. And then we can we can find the next right step for that client that's doable, right?
Right. Well, taking the blame off the patient. Often that client or patient is often frustrated because they've tried so many times, so many ways to improve their health and fitness. And being able to take the blame off them and be like, you know what? I know you've tried so many things in the past and that a lot of them haven't failed. And the reason why this time is going to be different is because now we have your numbers. We have your physiology for your body. And so now we can make today different. And you can take the blame off them. Like the reason why you failed before was just because you didn't have the right data.
Yeah.
And now we do, and we can help you. And so again, you're sitting on the same side with them. You're cheering them on and you're on their team versus sitting across the table being like, yeah, you are doing this wrong or you're doing that wrong. So when I see that somebody's RMR is dropping a little bit too fast as they're losing weight or something, instead of blaming them, being like, you're not doing it, you're not getting enough protein in, or you're not lifting weights, or you're not whatever, I can be like, okay, so it looks like some things are going well. We point out the things that go well. It's like, it looks like we still need to keep working on improving your protein. You probably have increased quite a bit from where you used to be. It looks like because our RMR is dropping more than we'd like, that we need to keep emphasizing that and keep building on how much protein you're getting in every day.
Yeah.
Or, how's the strength training been going? Awesome. Now you're doing 2 days a week, and that's more than you were doing before. Let's keep working to get that third day in. And so you can be a cheerleader with them when you have that accurate information, because we really know where they're at. And instead of blaming them and whatever, we can actually be their advocate.
Yeah. Well, and to your point about like, oh, you're doing this well, like, let's add on a little bit more.
Yeah.
When we can be on the same side of the table and look at these things, then we help move the person move at a speed that gets them results, but also gives affordance for their weaknesses.
Exactly.
And I think that's one of the big things, right? It's so often it's like, oh, you just need to be doing a ton of high intensity training, or oh, you just need to be doing this type of training or this type of training. And it's like all of that training is well and good at the right time.
Yeah.
And so, am I going to program something for someone that's just so far beyond what they can reach now or what they can do consistently that they end up getting burnt out again? And so when we have this, it's like, oh yeah, you know what? Like, let's start working on strength training. Or, hey, you know what? You already have a really great aerobic base. Like, let's work on adding some high intensity into your training.
Yeah.
And so that way we can program in a way that works really well for people and that they can do confidently. One of the things that I love to ask people is, like we've set up a program, like, okay, how many days per week for strength training, for example, are you like 90 to 100% confident that I can get in? Not that you want to do, not in an ideal world, but that right now, today, I can commit to this much time with almost perfect confidence. Oh, you know what? I know I can do one workout a week for 30 minutes. Great.
Perfect.
Let's start there. And that's a great starting place because I can do it. I'll be successful. And like the wild thing is even with minimal strength training, for example, like if you haven't been doing anything, we can still get some really positive improvements with one workout a week. And then we build from there. And so it does it in a sustainable way that helps people move from win to win to win instead of just constantly draining themselves.
Right. My goal was 4 days a week, which was probably an overshoot because so many things in their life had to change to get 4 days a week in.
Yeah.
Versus starting at 1 day a week and building to 4 and being like, right now, if you can get that 1 day a week in, that's a win. And in 2 weeks, we're going to try for 2 days a week or 3 weeks or, whatever. And we're going to build toward that 4 days a week. Ideally, you're going to, or however many, it doesn't matter. Just like we're going to build to that. And so that's the idea, is giving them those wins. And by having accurate data, we can track how those wins are leading to improvements. And we can then celebrate those successes and again, be on that same side of the table. So anyway, sorry. An aside there, but that's one of the reasons why I love talking about this conversation of having the accuracy of this information, is it allows us to be so much better of an advocate for our clients.
Yeah. Well, let's actually talk about dialing that in a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about how the RMR test will give us that daily activity estimate and then the exercise estimate. Let's talk about how doing the VO2 testing helps us to dial that even more. But first, I'm just going to put in a little thing. I just wanted to talk about our daily activity really quick. Um, and so this is an area. So when NEAT, the daily activity estimate is calculated, it's taking your RMR and multiplying it by what we call a physical activity level multiplier. And so depending on level of activity and gender, those are going to be a little bit different. But we tend to be really conservative with those. And so some people are like, oh, I do, like I'm pretty active, right? I do a few workouts a week. And so they end up putting themselves as highly active in terms of the estimate of daily activity. And that actually ends up overestimating by quite a bit. And so we're already accounting for the exercise calories. And so this is like activity outside of exercise. How active are you? And if you're doing, 2 to 3 workouts a week, great, that's accounted for in exercise activity. But if you're sitting in a desk all day, every day, the rest of the time, then you're probably, more inactive or sedentary or something like that. And so again, with estimates, this just gives us a range to work with. And then like, am I gaining body weight? Am I losing body weight? That helps me turn the dial. But just understanding where that error is in there. Another problem that we see too is with like wearables.
Oh,
so
big time.
Wearables tend to greatly overestimate how much we're burning in a given workout. Like not super great accuracy there.
Even your step counts and things like that. On a recent road trip, I drove to, well, a couple of them I've noticed this. We drove down all the way to Phoenix, Arizona, and then another to Las Vegas. And I'm sitting there driving in the car and noticing that my step count is going up, even though I've just been sitting for, 8 hours.
You're just really nervous.
Like, yeah, well, so I am fidgety and whatever. I move a lot, I guess. And I was noticing that my watch was giving me extra steps. And I'm like, okay, darn it. Like that just makes me think, it's not a perfect surrogate for how much my activity and my movement is, right? And so wearables do tend to overestimate. And they're still good at tracking trends of
Yes.
like, am I being more active or less active? Am I burning more calories or fewer calories? That they're helpful for tracking trends. But in terms of like dialing in your nutrition based on that or something, you may be under or over fueling because of its inability to base it on your actual physiology.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
I was so I talk a lot with my hands, and I was on a call the other day, and I was just all and I looked at my watch after, and it was like I got my stand hour even though I hadn't stood yet, right? just because I've been using my hands so much. So that was pretty funny.
That is funny.
But I want to point in, and I think we've talked about this other times, but tracking trends over time. So this is the difference between accuracy and precision. So accuracy is how close is this to the true measure of something, right? Am I getting an accurate calorie count? Not always. So some studies have shown wearables to be anywhere from like 28 to 93% inaccurate in terms of calorie burn.
Yeah.
But they tend to be very precise, right? And so if I'm doing workouts consistently over time, even if it's overestimating the calorie expenditure, it's still going to show me doing those regular workouts. And now it's like, oh, I've been doing longer workouts, and so it's showing a higher calorie burn. So it's still going to be precise, and so over changes, right? Like, well, how much exercise am I doing week over week or month over month? And tracking those trends.
So it's fun to track those trends and see those improvements and things. So I still think there's a lot of value in that.
For sure.
It's just you got to be careful how you understand that information and are using it.
Yeah. And I think especially when we are wanting to dial in things as quickly as possible, having those more accurate measurements are really going to help. And so we do the resting metabolic rate test. And so that's getting their measured gas exchange values. And from there we can say, hey, this is going to be your measured resting metabolic rate throughout the day. And then having that, we can do the exercise test. And then that will help us to dial in our exercise calories a lot better so that we can kind of turn that dial on, do I need to eat more calories? Do I need to eat fewer calories? Things like that.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things I love about the Cardio Coach app as well. When we have done a test and then we use that Cardio Coach app, it allows us to dial in, or allows the end user, right? So allows your patients, your clients to use that data much more accurately as well, because they can get the most accurate exercise calorie tracking app on the market, because it's based on your last test. And so it's still going to be a bit of an estimate, but it's much more accurate because it's basing those calorie burns and everything on your last test, which we measured those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so really fun there to be able to help people know exactly how many calories they burned on their last workout, so that they have a better idea of, okay, if my resting metabolic rate is here, and then I just went and my average heart rate was this, and it said I burned this many calories in the app. Now I know how I should refuel. My goal is fat loss. And so I burned 600 total calories, and 400 of those, because I was so good at staying in my zone too. 400 were fat and 200 were carbs. I know I need to at least eat 200 calories worth of carbs to make up for that workout. And, it just really helps dial some of those things in.
Yeah, well, and I think this is especially important in what you talked about in the beginning is, am I under fueling?
Yeah.
And that ends
It's a
up,
chronic problem.
it's a
for
chronic
so
problem.
many people.
Yeah, and that can lead to like some not great things, right? It can, like we can see problems with bones, right, where you get stress fractures. We can see it with like, it can affect mental health. For women, you get dysregulation of the menstrual cycle and thus dysregulation of hormones. Like there's some really not great things that can happen if we're under fueling. And like our bodies are highly adaptable,
Yeah.
which is great. But we do still want to fuel them adequately. And honestly, we want to fuel them optimally, so we give ourselves the best chance for performance, but also for general health. And so when we can dial in these numbers, it helps us to just pick the mix of what we eat and how we exercise and how we move throughout the day, and find a way that helps us match that to our goals, right? So if I just want to maintain weight, then I'm going to need to eat so many calories. If I want to lose weight, I'm going to need so many calories. If I want to gain weight, but it helps us to avoid really steep increases,
Right.
and then really steep decreases. And it's in those really steep decreases where I'm under fueling, and then I'm adding in a lot more physical activity, that we get into the danger zone. And so,
Right.
What we call that is red S. So it's relative energy deficiency in sport. That's
in sport.
But that can happen even if you're not an athlete, right?
Right.
And so again, that's kind of that it's not a great combination of I'm eating too little and I'm exercising so much that I'm having to dip into other reserves, right? Like instead of dipping into just my fat reserves, I start dipping into my muscle reserves.
Right.
I start downregulating other systems just so that I can keep the lights on, right? So we see downregulation in the reproductive system, downregulation in the immune system.
Immune system
and
goes quick.
Yeah. And so those are important considerations. And so knowing those numbers accurately and being able to dial them in can just help you make sure that you're getting that right mix of fueling and activity to help you meet the goals that you have.
Yeah. And it's crazy how much of an impact that can have. I always like to say that my favorite thing about doing metabolic testing is that we help people better line up their fitness and nutritional effort with their fitness and nutritional goals. So in the marketing world, they always say media message, the market media message match, or something like that. That you have to be advertising to the right market, using the right media that market responds to, with the right messaging that has to match to get your marketing to have the result that it wants, right? Yeah, I think that's what it is. Market media message match, something like that. Anyway, but that's essentially what we're doing with this, is we're giving the right information in the right context that allows people to match what they're trying to do with what they're actually doing. And we often see in the fitness industry that water is very muddy, that a lot of people say this is the right way, this is the right way. And quite frankly, there's no one right way. It's more about where am I at in my fitness right now and where do I want to go? And I can test myself then and see what's the path for me to get there. And that's what I love about the testing is we really can use that as the crystal ball of like, okay, this is how you have been training. And I can see that based on where your test is right now. So I can see past, present, and then future is okay, based on where you're at, these are the things we need to tweak to make improvements in these areas. Here's where your deficits are, here's where your strengths are. This is what we need to do. And it really is such a powerful tool. Most tools that we use in healthcare and fitness are diagnostic or descriptive. Very few, and I would say almost none, are prescriptive. Very few tell us what to do. And that's what I think is so powerful about VO2 testing, metabolic testing, physiological testing, whatever you want to call this industry. It is that we can also use it to say, this is what you need to do next.
Yeah.
And that's a rare thing and so powerful.
Well, and it's like you said, it's giving them the next steps. It's giving them a roadmap versus a blueprint. Right. And I think this is where people end up spinning their wheels a lot, is it's like, oh my gosh, like I've got to do it just like this or else I won't be successful. It's like, well, great if that matches your goals, if that matches your resources, if that matches your likes. But if not, then you end up feeling like there's something wrong with you.
Right.
Versus like, oh, there's so many ways to get to this destination. Let's find the ways that work for you and that do so sustainably. Like I was just talking to a friend the other day. There are certain exercises that I just really don't enjoy, right? Great exercises for targeting certain muscle groups, but I will do anything I can to avoid those exercises.
Split squats.
Split squats, right? And so like what I found is that for me, that's not effective. There's still plenty of other exercises that work those same muscle groups, and I can work around that constraint so that I have more buy-in to do my exercises, that I do them consistently over time, and then I actually get the changes that I want. And so, that just being able to mold to the person to create that individualized roadmap is just so much more effective over the long term.
Right. And training around injuries or likes and dislikes, things like that, where if a certain movement hurts, there's lots of different ways that you could target that same muscle group in a way that maybe doesn't hurt or things. Dialing that in for the individual. Same idea with our cardiovascular fitness and nutrition. We can dial that in for that person so that they can really achieve what they're looking to achieve. And by having accurate heart rate zones and allowing somebody to train according to their body is so powerful, because people get so frustrated that they train just from injury to injury to injury, or that they plateau and just like, I've been running at the same paces for the last 10 years and now I'm starting to see my paces go down. And most of the time it's just because they aren't going slow enough on their slow days because they didn't know where slow was. And they're not able to go fast enough on their fast days because they just don't have enough gas in the tank. And so when we give them their numbers, it really does unlock the key to finally making improvement without getting injured.
Absolutely. So something you said makes me think of this paradigm that I like to teach. And we talked about it a couple weeks ago. It's in approaching this new thing, is it a skill gap, a will gap, or as Cameron added, a thrill gap? And I love this, right?
Yeah.
And so, I was training too hard on my slow days. So that's a new skill that I need to develop. Now I have the data to be able to develop that skill. And I have the information that I know to do the daily practices that will help me to develop that skill and build over time, right? So it can help us to find those skill gaps and address those. It can also, like doing this testing and then having the conversations with clients, right? Being on the same side of the table, asking the questions can help us determine, is this a will gap? What is your deeper why, right? What is my big motivating thing for this? Because we often think of motivation as an exhaustible resource, and it's just typically the current activity doesn't have a strong enough buy-in versus a higher value activity, right? This, this cheese blizzard looks really great right now, right? Like my long-term goals aren't powerful enough to combat that in the moment. And so That's where like, well, what do I want deeper? So many of the people that we talk to, it's like, you had that client that watched their brother die in their 40s,
Yeah.
right? Or like, I watched my parents and they could never do anything with the kids or the grandkids. Like that was so painful. I don't want to be like that, right? Like I want to be able to show up for my kids and my family and friends in all the ways that they need and the ways that I love to. And so what's that deeper why driving you and helping your clients to discover that, right? We've talked in previous episodes about the 5 whys, right? Keep going deeper and deeper until you kind of get that base why that they can hold on to. Or what was the story of the Mount Everest guy?
Oh, just wanting to do it for his grandkids instead of himself.
Yeah.
That
Like it
that
wasn't
was
enough to
his
get him out of bed.
right. He wouldn't get himself out of bed on, those just dark mornings where it's middle of the winter and it's still dark outside and it's cold and you're like, I've got to go do this and I really would rather just stay in bed. And that's what he used was that I maybe won't do it for me, but I will do it for them. I want to show my grandkids that I can do hard things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And so for him, that was motivating to get up and do that training. And then take that to Everest. Like such a
Yeah.
cool story.
Yeah.
And then throw a gap. Like sometimes the plan just isn't exciting enough, right? There's just not enough buy-in. And so it's like, hey, let's find some exercises that you really like to do, or let's match this to some reward, right? Like,
Right.
hey, you only get to watch this show when you do your long runs, or once you've reached this level, you get a new pair of running shoes, or you get this new, outfit for weightlifting or something like that.
Right. Well, I've found that runners, for example, hate strength training, many. But when you can tie strength training into a specific outcome of like, okay, here's a deficit in your running. The way we can fix that is these set of exercises. Then all of a sudden, strength training becomes more motivating. Or if somebody just doesn't like exercise in general, tying it back to this isn't a punishment for bad eating. This isn't because you're overweight. This isn't whatever. This is you enjoy doing activity X. You want to be able to get on the floor with your grandkids. So this exercise works on this phase of you getting down to the floor and getting back up. And this exercise helps you to be able to have the shoulder mobility to reach for that thing on the shelf. Tying each exercise or each exercise modality, so whether it's walking, running, whatever, into an actual task that they do, all of a sudden makes the strength training not quite as painful. If I have somebody that's like, oh, I don't really have time for exercise, but I love to play pickleball. It's like, okay, I understand that. What if we gave you some things though that could make you better at pickleball?
Mm.
Okay, yeah, I would do
You've piqued my
that.
interest.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to beat Jenny out on the court? Here's how you do it, right?
Yeah.
And so here are the specific exercises that you can do. If you want to improve on that split step so that you have more lateral quickness and better reaction time to the ball, here's an exercise that's going to help increase that hip strength and blah, 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 so that you can, so tying that into their actual goals really does help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the bottom line that you brought up earlier is let's tie this into people's goals and make sure that the effort matches the goals
Right.
so that we're getting the results that we want and we don't end up spinning our wheels and then feeling like, oh, it's just my fault.
Right. And so bringing that back to testing by having accurate information with this RMR and VO2 data and VCO2 that it gives us the fat and carbohydrate burn, it gives us the ability to really game plan specifically for that patient. Obviously, you still have to ask the right questions of what are your goals? What are the things you want to do? What are your motivation kind of setbacks, or, where are we at in terms of readiness to actually do the thing? But then when we go to take their input and we apply the right data to it, we really can create a better program that's designed to help them where they're at and help them move forward.
Absolutely. Getting both the accuracy and precision. Oh, I think that is crucial, right? Being able to have that good data so that we get them reliable information, and then that helps us ask the right questions, right? Good data helps us ask better questions, and then give better answers. So love it. Well, thanks so much for joining us. As always, if you want more content like this, remember to like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time. Ready to take your metabolic testing to the next level? Visit core.com to learn more about purchasing our metabolic test equipment.